Hi, my name is Tyler, and this is the Fox Valley Film Critics. In this special episode of the show, we're going to be changing things up a bit. Instead of our usual AFI films, we're going to be discussing a pair of Shakespeare films. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the show, brought to you by Groupthink Productions and FVTV. As I stated in the intro, we're going to be shaking things up a bit and discussing a pair of Shakespeare films. To do that, we've brought in a special guest from New York State, who is a graduate student studying English. Thank you so much for coming on, Meaghan.
Nice to be here.
Sure. So generally, I try to make these episodes timely to some degree, so to have some sort of connection to whatever the subject we're doing is. For this one, there really isn't. We just kind of mutually share a fascination with Shakespeare, so I just thought it'd be fun to try this.
Yeah. I have to say, Shakespeare isn't like exactly what I'm studying. I know a little bit about it, so we're gonna do my best, but Much Ado About Nothing and Hamlet are some of my favorites, so hopefully we'll get some good stuff.
Well, we talk about it a lot.
That's true.
So we're gonna start with your pick. And for both of our picks, we ended up going with Kenneth Brannaugh.
I know. Yeah. So Much Ado. Okay, do you want me just to start talking about how I read it as the literary text, and we can move into the film aspect of it?
Sure, and now I'll just say, I think from a discussion standpoint, you're primarily hitting this from a literary perspective. I'll be doing the film buff deal, so you can go ahead and start.
Perfect. Yeah, well, so in general, for both films actually, Shakespeare really emphasizes themes of like emergent individuality, introspection, consciousness, perception, illusion, and deceit. So he's really concerned with how an individual can see the world, and this is kind of a relatively new concept. I know it sounds sort of weird, but in the Renaissance and the early modern era, you're moving out of the Middle Ages, and in the Middle Ages, everybody was more collectively minded, and so that means that they were expected to be working towards social harmony more so than paying attention to their feelings and their emotions and expressing that in excess. So Shakespeare's really playing with those themes a lot in both these films and in his plays. So in Much Ado, you see this theme of seeing come up like a bunch of times, and it's actually even in the title. So one thing I found was interesting was that Much Ado About Nothing, the word nothing in the Renaissance was actually pronounced as noting, and so it was a homophone for actually noting or observing, and also writing things down too. So you kind of have this idea of Much Ado About Nothing, but also Much Ado About noting or observing and what people see. So again, it all is, he's emphasizing the subjectivity of the human mind here. Okay. And secondly, you know, as much as I'm not really a gender studies scholar, the play does concern itself with that simply because it's a marriage plot. And so that really kind of gets blurred into the idea of seeing and how people perceive each other in these relationships that develop. Yeah. And then also, I'd like to underscore too that Much About Nothing is actually a problem comedy, or so-called labeled a problem comedy. And what this means is that even though it is a comedy and it has this happy ending and everything, the resolution makes the audience feel a little bit uncomfortable. And you see this mostly in Hero and her story arc, because she ends up marrying Claudio, and he can be a little obtuse, perhaps, and worse, and abusive even, and violent. And I also like to eventually talk about that scene, how Brannaugh kind of plays that off, because I think he does a pretty good job emphasizing the problem comedy aspect. Most adaptations don't. They tend to resolve that idea because modern audiences don't like that sexist sort of aspect of Hero having to marry this guy or whatever, and so they sort of appease those audiences, but that's not really Shakespeare's goal. He wants the audience to see the problems in society and make them become introspective about it and kind of apply that to their lives, and not just solve everything and have a happy ending and forget about it when they leave the play or the film and everything. So, yeah.
That's a very good summary. So we can jump just straight into the Brannaugh version. You said that I read your the essay you sent me a long time ago about Much Ado and about Hero, and you're saying that you think that Branagh actually fixes the problem here to some degree?
At the end, I think he could have gone further with it. Again, so the failed wedding scene, I think, is one of the most important scenes, and he captures that extremely well. Claudio comes in, and he basically verbally abuses Hero in the beginning, in front of all her family and friends. Her reputation's completely ruined. He calls her out, and then he gets physical. I mean, he like pulls her. He basically throws her at one point. I think a little bit like over a bench or something, if I'm remembering correctly. And then he like, as like a little kid, like a 2-year-old having a tantrum, knocks down all the wedding decorations and just kind of goes crazy. And then the other men in the play also kind of step into that role too, like Hero's father, and he gets physical with her as well. And of course, I mean, she's totally innocent, and it just is based off of a contrived eavesdropping scene that Don John kind of constructs, and, as you know. So that's really interesting because when they do get married, I mean, Claudio is very humble and contrite, but at the same time, you kind of wonder at his sincerity of that. But then Branagh kind of stages the end of the movie as if Hero's very overjoyed and happy to marry Claudio like nothing ever happened. And I think that's where I depart a little bit from his interpretation. I think that if he had Hero become a little more silent and reserved, and really emphasize that she is kind of in a predicament, I think that would have helped the problem comedy aspect of it and what Shakespeare was really trying to get at. But overall, he does a really good job compared to other adaptations.
Yeah, and obviously the most immediate one to compare it to would be the Joss Whedon version,
Right.
where Claudio is not presented in a good light by the end of the film.
That's true. But honestly, I think that Whedon does a worse job with the problem comedy aspect, because at the end, he doesn't really emphasize. I mean, that scene is contentious, but he doesn't emphasize it as much as Branagh does, in my opinion. And so the problem comedy kind of slips into the background a little bit. And at the end, too, Hero's still pretty happy about her marriage and everything. But yeah. So I also wanted to kind of emphasize the scene of the masquerade party. I think that's an interesting one, how Branagh stages that, or I guess films it, because it really emphasizes the characters and misperceptions and perceiving and seeing things. So everyone is wearing a mask, and I think it's very interesting, the mask that Claudio and Benedict are wearing. So first of all, Claudio's wearing like a baby mask, and it works so well because Prince Don Pedro, he goes and basically woos Hero for him. Like Claudio's like not a man, he can't handle it or something, and also too, I think at one part, like, he's kind of getting made fun of by the other guys there, and it just, with this baby mask on it just fits so well. But it emphasizes Shakespeare's, in my opinion, goal to make Claudio a character that is not introspective, that just believes everything he sees, and he doesn't think critically about it, which is why he falls for the lies about Hero. And again, that mask as a child and totally like fits with that. So I think Branagh did a really good job. And then of course you have Benedict's mask, which is kind of the fool. And it's interesting because he's more introspective, but he also hides behind that mask, and yet Beatrice can still see through him. So they kind of represent characters that are more introspective and can use those abilities to kind of help them navigate the story a little bit better.
Okay. So I don't want to shift the conversation too violently. In my reviewings of the film in the past week, one of the thing I'm kind of curious about in viewing these is just to what degree Branagh understands the material. I mean, obviously, he's obviously a very intelligent guy when it comes to reading these. Obviously, someone who has the passion to read into these stories, you're gonna understand them. But when it comes to most Shakespeare adaptations, I'm always curious to see what elements people tend to glom onto. And with these ones, we'll talk about with both films because there are obviously elements that are strange, but Branagh has this thing where he makes very bizarre decisions on the fringes of the films. And I talked about in our prep about this, how I wanted to talk about the casting. I don't understand some of his casting decisions for this film, even though I love them, like Keanu Reeves as Don John.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, he can't. There are some people that can do Shakespeare, and there are some people that can't do Shakespeare. He can't really do Shakespeare. I don't know, I guess it's like he becomes this like totally static, one-dimensional villain. And I mean, that is kind of Shakespeare's like presentation in the play, but I just wish he was a little less of
He's
I don't
not
know.
a Shakespearean actor, though.
No, no.
There's a great bit in a cartoon I watched once where a critic goes in to see a movie of The Merchant of Venice starring Keanu Reeves, and he's reading the "If You Prick Us" speech, and he's just reading it in his valley accent, and he's just the worst thing. If you prick us, do you not get bummed?
Oh
I'm
my
just
gosh, that's exactly how he
like,
said.
So
Yeah.
it's just strange things like that make me wonder to what is his approach to how he adapts these films. But obviously I think he gets the most important thing I want you to do he gets right, which is Beatrice and what's his name?
Benedict, yeah,
Benedict, yeah,
they're
Beatrice and
brilliant.
Benedict.
Yeah, they're perfect.
Mostly because Branagh and his wife are playing them.
That's true. They have a lot of chemistry, and that's totally true. Yeah, I don't know what happened with Keanu Reeves. Maybe like Branagh was giving him a favor or something. I don't know.
Well,
But,
he has more clout than any director I've ever seen. Like, well, you were pointing out strange casting in Hamlet the day when you were texting me during it.
yeah, I know. Well, Robin Williams just randomly. I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, there are weirder ones than that, even in Hamlet. But like, just Robin Williams shows up out of nowhere just for a small role, or Judi Dench shows up in a flashback, or
Yeah.
Charlton Heston is the player king, which is just perfect. But yeah, when it comes to Much Ado, I think I always get the sense that Branagh, he gets the broad strokes, and he has an amazing attention to detail in a way that he can allude to certain elements of the character, as you were saying with the masquerade scene.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, it just frays, and just like, who's in the driving seat here?
No, that's true. I feel that. I mean, watching the whole thing, I mean, there were just a little parts of like disharmony that didn't quite like work for me in terms of the presentation. But you're right. I mean, Branagh, he understood the problem comedy aspect. No one really does. So that was really great. But yeah, there's weird things. I don't know what to do with Keanu Reeves. He's just.
I mean, he's not even the only weird one. I mean, Denzel Washington is also in it. He's
I kind of liked him.
He's
though.
great, but
He did well.
it's strange that he's also playing John's brother, considering they're not the same skin color, which is fine for the movie,
So-
but it's
Actually, I guess John is illegitimate. So
Okay, that makes
might
sense.
explain something. Yeah.
okay. So there's a very complicated
Yeah.
detail.
And that's why he's kind of like the villain and everything because he's bitter and all that.
Sure.
Whatever. But yeah.
I've now seen the play and read the play and seen two versions of it, and I couldn't quite glom onto why Don John was entirely mad at everyone else, but
Yeah, I think it's mentioned like somewhere that he's illegitimate or whatever, but
he's illegitimate, so I'm going to ruin my friend's wedding.
that's how illegitimate people work in Shakespeare's plays, basically.
Of course.
But yeah, I don't know. I think he could have done better with the villain, but
Sure. I mean, is there any significance to the setting of the film that they bumped it up to Victorian era?
I don't think that Much Ado is quite Victorian. Hamlet definitely is. I would say Much Ado is like sort of in between, like 1700, 1800, just by the dress and everything. Although I will say this about the costuming. For Branagh, he pays a lot of attention to colors, so all the women are in white, which is interesting because it's very easy then for that scene for the hero to be replaced by her maid and everything because they're always wearing the same clothes. It also kind of plays with the idea of purity.
Yeah.
And so that's super interesting. And actually, the colors are even more prominent in Hamlet, the costuming, I thought. So yeah, I don't know if the Victorian aspect really is. I could talk about it more in Hamlet because in Much Ado, it's set in Italy. Everything's kind of like more loose and casual, which fits with the comedy aspect and also like the gender relations and stuff like that. So
Yeah, I've thought a lot about the whole. Well, we have to wrap up for this segment, but join us for the next segment. We'll be jumping into Hamlet. Stay tuned. Hello, welcome back. So, kind of jumping back into the point I was making right before we got the whirlybird. One of the things that I find interesting about modern interpretations of Hamlet is like how they play with the setting, like how they bring up a lot of modern versions of Hamlet, where they or not just Hamlet, but of any Shakespeare play, they'll bring up the setting to either a modern day or to a period specific. Like there's the Ian McKellen Richard III that's set in World War II essentially, or some of the other Branagh adaptations like Love's Labour Lost, which is also set in World War II. There's a lot of World War II ones, or Joss Whedon, which is just contemporary, vaguely rich people. And it works at different levels depending on which play it is. Like the history ones are much weirder when they move them up. But as I was going to say with Much Ado, I think that the setting is fine because it's a very kind of a universal story. So you can move that up to the 17th century and make that work. Now you were going to say in regards to Hamlet, how you thought that was going to that actually has an impact on the plot.
Yeah, I think that the setting does, well, at least the time period, it gives an interesting layer to everything. So basically, to bring it to a Victorian setting, you get this sort of buttoned up feel. It's very tense. Everything's neat and perfect. The colors are vibrant, which is interesting because for Hamlet, he's introspective. He's seeing things and trying to figure out what's going on, and his emotions are running wild. But yet he still has to function in this very tense sort of like prim and proper environment. And I think that just really emphasizes the tension that's going on with him and his relationship to the society and the people around him. And I don't know, did you want to talk about the costumes a little bit, like the strange colors and stuff?
We can. I mean, I wanted to add as a note, that's part of that is an effect of the way they filmed it. They shot it on 65 millimeter, which is one size below the maximum size camera you can shoot on, which means that every detail, every color is just completely vibrant and in focus and beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
This was one of the last films up until like the last couple of years that they shot 65 millimeter on, because it's just so expensive, and that was right before the digital film transition to the early 2000s. So this is one of the biggest versions of Hamlet I like that there is.
Yeah, and you can really see that. I mean, you just see the detail, the ornateness, everything comes through so well for that. And I think it does, work really well. Again, like you look at this perfect world on the surface, and then by the end of the film, everything comes crashing down. So I think that juxtaposition of this beautiful setting really works well, and at the end when everything goes to hell.
Well, literally, because they smashed they smashed the what's
the glass in the windows.
The glass windows, the giant thing in the ceiling comes crashing down and hits Claudio.
Yeah, so I think that that setting again.
Claudius, sorry.
Claudius, yeah, right. He reuses names so much; it's so hard to keep track. So yeah, I think that actually I was going to talk about that great hall setting with all the glass doors and the mirrored aspect of it. And in many scenes, it works really well. Again, it emphasizes Hamlet being very introspective and just focusing on himself and only seeing himself. Especially in the one scene where he opens all the doors looking for Claudius to see if he can find out where he's listening and stuff. And it's as if like Hamlet keeps searching to understand what's going on around him, but all he can see is himself. So that was a great aspect. And then at the end, when everything shatters, it's like everyone's image shatters. And also, because Hamlet's the prince, he sort of represents the state of Denmark. And his fragile self-image basically is Denmark's fragility as well. And so that kind of explains how it gets taken over and as Hamlet kind of descends into madness.
Sure. I mean, we were talking about the ambition of the film. I love how much work that just goes into making the film ornate, but it has to be said that this is the only 4-hour cut of Hamlet that there is. I was reading, I think it was 1599, A Year in the Life of William Shakespeare, earlier this year, and he was saying that, I think it was James Shapiro said that at its time, Hamlet was considered an excessively long play, and here it is an excessively long 4-hour movie. And usually when it comes to cinematic versions of Shakespeare, you have to cut it down for reasonable purposes because the audience expectation is 2 hours. You go to 2.5 hours and people start complaining that it's too long. And there's a lot of interesting examples to see how people cut it. Like, did you watch the King Lear version I sent you that was like an hour long?
I didn't. I watched part of it.
Okay, there's a good introduction in that where the introducer talks about what they cut out of it was Orson Welles' cut of King Lear. He talks about, well, how do you cut 2 hours out of King Lear? Simple, you cut out the subplots. And that's like, well, that's one way to do it. But you can cut out a lot of these films and still maintain the original plot. I mean, Welles made an hour-long version of Hamlet that didn't have the to be or not to be soliloquy, which just shows you how much you can cut out of these plays and just have the basic plot. But obviously, part of the depth comes in seeing the full version, seeing the whole context of the story. And this version is the best at that because it gives you every single detail in full color, in full vision, including most of the flashbacks, which are fully realized, even if you don't always want it.
That's true. The one scene where Hamlet had the flashback of the court jester and his little kid was like super awkward. I don't know. It was like so random. It's like it didn't even need to be in there.
I guess not. I mean, I can see what the appropriate use of being able to see the actual face behind Yorick. So
yeah, no, that's true. I guess. I know it was a weird juxtaposition because the other scene was so dark, and then it just switches to that. But yeah, no, honestly,
contrast is a powerful tool.
It is. Yeah, it is, and that happens a lot in this film. Honestly, the length of the film was a little difficult. I should have done it in like 2 sittings, but I powered through.
Yeah,
and you kind of miss a lot. I feel like I don't know.
It's really hard. Like on a first viewing, it's very hard to catch every single like note of it. It helps to have read the story, obviously, because then you go into it knowing what happens. And then you can be like, oh, I'm at this part of the play. Oh, I'm at this part of the play. So, but if I went into this with no knowledge of the plot, I would just be like tearing hairs, like, what is happening?
It would be difficult to follow, yeah. And it's interesting. And Hamlet was long in the early modern era and the Renaissance, but I believe it's like a 5-act show. And basically, when the audiences would come in, they were much more like audio tuned than we are. So when they saw a play like that, they would actually have most of it like memorized by the end of it. They could just play it back because just culturally they focus more on hearing because no one was really literate and stuff. And so while Hamlet was long for them, they probably could have handled it better than we can. We have shorter attention spans, I think, to some degree. So that's kind of an interesting aspect, and it's interesting how that translates to a full version in modern adaptation compared to the historical context.
Yeah, I mean, with Much Ado, obviously, there's much less to cut out. So
that's true.
You can make that more easily into a 2-hour movie. I don't even know if they cut out a lot of it. They probably did some.
Yeah, for the most part, it's pretty complete, I think. But also with Hamlet, you know, it's such a self-centered play about a self-centered guy. So why wouldn't you keep everything in, you know?
Oh yeah, so the indulgence plays into the visual, the themes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. The only thing I don't think I liked about it was Brannaugh's weird bleached hair, but with the weird,
I'll accept that as a perfectly valid criticism.
That was the only color choice that I was like, I don't know.
Is he supposed to be blonde? I don't know.
Well, they're from Denmark, I guess, and you know, I mean, it kind of makes him like all weird and moody, like a weird teenager. I mean, and that's another thing. Hamlet's supposed to be like 19 or something, and Brannaugh's like 40.
Well, oh gosh, yeah, there's that. No, there's he's weird casting falls into the central role in this case.
It's interesting to see Branagh as you know, a comedic hero, and then as Hamlet. Like that contrast was very interesting. He does a great job, but I couldn't help from like kind of seeing him as Benedict in some ways. I don't know.
I appreciate that we aren't just dealing with a totally melancholic Hamlet the entire time. He's playing wacky Hamlet.
Yeah, I think that's totally valid.
Which makes the 4-hour cut tolerable.
Well, tolerable.
If this was depressing Hamlet the whole time, 4 hours would not be justified.
Yeah, and it plays into his how people perceive him as being mad. I'm not really sure I buy Hamlet as being completely insane. I think he's more angry than mad, and again, like he kind of forces himself to become crazy just out of isolation.
That's always the central question to me whenever I revisit Hamlet: is to what degree is Hamlet faking being crazy or actually crazy at any given moment? Because in his private moments, you get the sense that he's suicidal and depressed and upset at the world that he doesn't want to be there. But when he's in public, he's going words, words, words.
Right.
Kenneth Branagh's bizarre performance of that line.
I know. Well, and that was weird because it kind of made me like take a step back. I'm like, oh, it kind of works. Hamlet wants to get like reactions out of people. He wants to kind of see how people are going to take him because he's self-absorbed. I mean, he just cares about how they see him.
Well, that line is also that falls into my criticism where I don't know what Branagh's thinking at any given moment. Because that line is obviously supposed to be like, what are you reading? Words. Just he's supposed to. The whole point is just supposed to be kind of like a postmodern, like cynical, like I'm just looking at a piece of paper right now, and there's words printed on the paper. It's supposed to be he's so lost in his introspective, and he's trying to project that out on other people. So that's one of the points where I just don't know to what degree Hamlet's being serious or not. Like,
Yeah, well, and I think that that's a really interesting point to make because the people around Hamlet are not nearly as introspective as he is, and so they also don't know what to make of him. And that's kind of Brannaugh's way of, I think, including the audience in trying to discern Hamlet and either sympathize with him or criticize him. And again, Shakespeare always brings in the audience to discern his themes as much as he can. And so I think it's interesting because, again, like Hamlet's mother, I mean, all these people don't know what to make of Hamlet either.
Neither does Kenneth Branagh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was about to say something, but I can't remember what it was. Well, you were going to say you wanted to contrast this to Much Ado?
Yeah, so Much Ado, again, emphasizes the idea of the values of being critical and introspective and aware of your own consciousness and really reading other people and not to believe everything you see at face value. That's a great theme that runs through that play. In Hamlet, it really emphasizes the dangers of getting lost in yourself and basically sometimes being self-aware can help you read other people, but with Hamlet, he is so caught up in that he can't read anyone else but himself, and he destroys his entire kingdom for that. And also, I mean, Ophelia drives her insane, although I never really understood Ophelia. She's just kind of like a nothing character that just goes crazy for no reason. But
supposedly, I don't know if it already happened or not. There's supposed to be an Ophelia movie with Daisy Ridley in the part, and it's supposed to be like a feminist critique of Hamlet, which
sorry.
No, I know it's fine. It just like I thought that was kind of interesting. It's just like obviously it's one of those things that just doesn't hold up modern.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've never, if I thought about it more, I could figure it out. I mean, she's supposed to be kind of a foil to Hamlet and how Hamlet is manipulating other people and whatnot. That would be an interesting, I think, film to watch. I don't know if the feminist ideology is going to overpower what Shakespeare was originally trying to get at with Ophelia. I'd be interested to see that.
It could be like, what's the movie called? Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, which I have a copy of right here, but I couldn't remember. I was like, what is that movie I had? Yeah, it could be like that, where you just hone in on one or one character from the play and just kind of try to explore them, because there's a lot of characters in this play. That a lot of them that get underserviced or that are there for a specific purpose and end up kind of not acting the way they should. Like with those two characters, they're supposed to be Hamlet's friends, and which I appreciate in this movie. They really hone in on the friend part because you see their chemistry. And apparently one of them is played by the actor, one of the actors from Harry Potter who played I forget his name. It was the guy who turned into a rat, but.
Oh yeah, I did. He was familiar from somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, those are really interesting. And then they too just die at the end. Like no.
Yeah, apparently they're killed off screen.
Yeah.
But I like how in this movie they kind of fix that, because in the play version or different versions I've seen, either they're cut out altogether or they're not emphasized in any degree. So I liked seeing that they had chemistry and that they're given more, because usually they're just there to drive the plot. And unfortunately we got to cut off, but that's all the time we have for this episode of the show. I want to thank you for coming on. This was really intelligent. I enjoyed it. If you want to watch more past episodes of the show, you can find them on the Groupthink Productions YouTube page. You can follow me on Twitter at antisocialcriti. That's critic without the C at the end of it. And you can find more of my written reviews at Geeks Under Grace and Legal Insurrection. I'm Tyler with the Fox Valley Film Critics. Have a wonderful day.